The dust storm had been silent. It always was, on this side of Ebon's moon, where atmosphere was more memory than substance. The thick gray drifts moved like ghosts across the barren flats outside Ren's dome, soft, swirling, uninvited. He stood at the edge of the reinforced glass, mug of bitter mint broth in hand, watching the powdery trail vanish. He'd sealed the solar hatches hours before, and now the world was dim, the pale light of Ebon's dying sun catching on the edges of frost and static. The knock startled him. Not loud. Not even insistent. Just a soft tap-tap, barely perceptible over the low hum of the oxygen recycler. Ren frowned. Nobody knocked on moon stations. Not this far from the trade paths. Especially not in storm season. He crossed the main room, past his hanging grow vines and the half-disassembled irrigation unit. Another tap came just as he reached the airlock's view panel. Someone was there. A figure slumped against the sealed outer door, nearly obscured by pale dust. The emergency beacon on her suit still blinked, red and slowing. She wore no insignia, just a simple brown-gray suit, and her helmet was cracked along one side. No colony markings. No border colors. Not one of his. Not from this moon. Ren didn't hesitate. He activated the outer lock, depressurized the chamber, and pulled her in. She woke hours later, slow and blinking, beneath the warming lights of his med bench. Ren sat a few feet away, not speaking, one hand loosely wrapped around a cooling mug. She turned her head, slowly, voice dry. Where am I? Southern Ridge Dome. Last working station this side of the dead zone. She frowned, as if orienting. What moon? Ebon, 4. Her lips twitched. That explains the dust. He waited. When she didn't say more, he rose and handed her a cup. Hydration mix. Nothing fancy. You'll feel better. She accepted it silently, glancing at his face only once, then drinking slowly. When the cup was empty, she looked at him again. You saved me. I answered a knock, he said simply. And you were still breathing. She blinked. Most wouldn't have opened the hatch. Not without knowing who I was. I didn't ask. That made her pause. Not confusion, surprise. Then, very softly. Thank you. Her name was Leora. She gave it the second morning, after sleeping nearly 16 hours. Her voice was stronger then, though she still didn't explain where she'd come from. Or what had broken her suit. Or why she was alone in the storm zone. Ren didn't press. He was used to people not explaining themselves. They moved in a quiet rhythm. She helped him repair the grow unit, careful and precise with the tools. He didn't ask where she'd learned to fix agricultural circuits with such confidence. She didn't ask why he had a dome half covered in poetry fragments and dried lunar flowers pressed between glass sheets. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was something else. Something gentler. On the third night, when she lingered by the observatory window, Ren said quietly. Storms are worse this cycle. You should stay until the fields settle again. Leora's gaze didn't move from the glowing horizon. Is that really why? Ren hesitated. Then, just as quietly, no. She wore her hair braided, coiled at the back of her neck. The fourth night, she unbraided it in the light of the hydroponic shelves and Ren felt something shift in the room, something like gravity giving way. He asked her then, finally, over a shared bowl of synth grains and preserved citrus. What were you doing out there? She met his eyes. Her voice was steady. Running. From what? Home. Why? A beat. Because they chose who I would be. And I didn't. Ren nodded. He didn't need more. They shared the dome for nearly a month. She made the sleeping alcove her own slowly, adding little things. A folded blanket in a new color. A paper journal. She wrote in it sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking. He was always looking. He found himself waiting for her voice in the mornings. Not because it was melodic, though it was, but because it meant another day with her presence threading through his quiet life. Ren didn't know when companionship turned into need. He only knew that when she brushed past him to reach a tool, his breath caught. That when she laughed, once, dry and sudden, his chest ached with something too big to name. He caught her watching him, sometimes, when she thought he was asleep. They kissed on the 33rd day. No dramatic storm. No dire injury. Just a quiet evening, lights dimmed low, soft music from a half-functioning waveband player. She sat beside him, closer than usual, and when he turned, her face was already tilted up toward his. No words. Just the press of her mouth against his, soft and sure. Just that. When she pulled back, her hand lingered at his jaw, and she whispered. "I don't regret running." Ren swallowed. "I'm glad you did." The sky outside the archive was not a sky at all. Just thick, swirling gas clouds, greenish gold and endless, pressing against the transparent dome that housed the floating city of Esnari. There was no sunrise here. No dusk. Just perpetual light and shifting shadows that danced across the glass and titanium bones of the structure. Nail preferred it that way. Clarity, he thought, came more easily in places that didn't pretend to be natural. He stood at the edge of the upper atrium, staring down at rows of memory columns, long shafts of preserved histories, archived languages, and treaties so old they had to be handled in magnetic gloves. Above him, drift engines hummed faintly, keeping the platform stable in the ever-turbulent gases of Ganesha Prime. His work was quiet. Deliberate. Archival classification of names and lineage. Verification of diplomatic ancestry. He liked it because nobody asked questions. Until today. "You're being reassigned," came the director's voice. Nail turned, expression blank. To what? Joint project. Restoration of a lost diplomatic concord. Their side sending a representative. Nail's jaw tensed. "You know I don't do field work." "You'll be based in Esnari," the director replied, already turning away. "They'll meet you here. Your job is data correlation. Not diplomacy." Nail didn't argue further. But later, he found himself staring out the dome again. Not at the gas giants. Not at the city's mechanical veins. Just his own reflection. The scar beneath his eye. The name badge pinned to his shirt. Nail Sen. Not the name he was born with. But the one he chose. She arrived 2 days later. Late, without apology. Her boots echoed sharply in the main hall, her step assured, her expression cool beneath the silver half-mask she wore. "Ira Kyn," she said simply, offering no hand, just a nod. Nail stood behind the long interface table. Nail Senator Record Liaison. She inclined her head slightly. "You know who I am." He did. Everyone in Interstellar Archives had seen the footage once. Her face, bare then, shouting over fire in the collapsing halls of the Rovan embassy. Her orders saved 24 lives. Her career hadn't survived. Nail didn't mention it. Just motioned to the chair across from his. "We're beginning with the first Concord. The one that was erased," she said, seating herself. Intentionally. He met her gaze. "That's the theory. That's the truth." Days passed in quiet labor. She worked like she fought, focused, quick, unrelenting. He found her infuriating at first. Too sharp. Too fast. Too certain. But she listened when he spoke. And when she didn't understand a thing, she asked. That mattered. They worked late most nights. The archive lit only by soft blue overlays from the holodibles. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, just worked in synchronicity that needed no confirmation. But other nights. What made you leave your old position? Ira asked once, fingers drifting through a projected map of former treaty zones. Nail didn't look up. Didn't want to be where my name meant something. She went still. Family name? A name that used to open doors, he said softly. Then closed too many. Ira nodded once, then returned to the map. But later, she whispered, you're lucky. You got to leave yours behind. They didn't touch, not at first. But sometimes she stood close enough that he felt the heat of her arm through their sleeves. Sometimes he caught her staring, not openly, just curious. Sometimes he looked too. She kept her mask on. Always. Even late. Even tired. Even once, when she fell asleep at the table. Nail wondered what it was she didn't want him to see. He didn't ask. He understood the need to hide. A week before the presentation, they had a breakthrough. An ancient recording. Visual fragment. Barely stable. But it confirmed what they'd suspected, a joint agreement between their worlds existed a century before the official alliance. Signed by lovers from both sides. A scandal. A peace. An erasure. Ira stood over the projection as it played, jaw tight. This changes everything. They'll try to discredit it, Nail said quietly. Say it's manufactured. Fake. Then we show them both of us. He blinked. What? She looked at him, really looked. You said your name used to mean something. Mine still does. We bring this to the council, together. They'll have to listen. Nail hesitated. But then, he nodded. That night, they didn't work. They sat side by side beneath the observatory dome. No stars above, only the gas ocean, luminous and strange. Can I ask? Nail said, not looking at her. Why the mask? Ira was silent for a long moment. Then she reached up and unhooked the latch. The silver fell away with a soft sound. Her face was marked. Not disfigured, beautiful still, but there was a scar across her left temple, and an implant set just beneath the eye. A reminder of the day she saved her people. The day her own Senate turned on her. Nail didn't flinch. He just looked at her like he always had. When she turned away, he said gently, you don't need to hide anything from me. Her voice trembled, barely. I always do. He reached over. Not to touch her. Just to be near. They kissed the next morning. Not out of passion. Not yet. Just quiet understanding, like two people who had long carried things alone and finally didn't have to anymore. His ship, Meridian Trace, rattled like a half-dead snake with every jump. She was patched together from a dozen junked haulers, her core thrusters held in place with little more than welded willpower and obsolete NAV tech. But she flew. And in the far edges of the void, where old war routes twisted into dead zones, that was what mattered. He didn't take passengers. Not anymore. Not since the incident at Trinar 6. But that rule changed the night he intercepted a Mayday ping from an unregistered vessel skimming the edges of the Lomaric debris ring. One pilot. Life signs faint. He hesitated for 5 whole seconds before flipping the NAV relay and angling toward the signal. Stupid heart, he muttered, throttling forward. She was barely alive when he found her. A small, heavily scarred courier pod. No insignia, no registry. The cockpit cracked from shrapnel, oxygen thin. Blood, dark and floating, drifted in the microgravity cabin. Her suit was torn. Half-masked. And despite the wreckage, she had one hand still locked on the NAV yoke, even unconscious. Kalen pulled her out fast. In his medbay, she woke gasping, eyes wide and disoriented. She kicked him. Hard. Almost broke his rib. He didn't blame her. You're safe, he said, backing up slowly. You were bleeding out in a courier wreck. I pulled you. She blinked. Coughed. Then rasped. Why? Kalen shrugged. Because no one else would. She stared at him for a long time. Thanks. Her name was Solvi. She said it on the second day, after waking in a haze of painkillers and engine noise. Kalen didn't ask more. He figured names were the tip of deeper scars. Solvi didn't ask questions either. She just watched everything, his tools, his movements, the way he always double-checked oxygen seals twice even when alone. UX Mill? She asked one night, over shared ration packs and tea. Kalen nodded once. You. Her lip twitched, almost a smirk. Not exactly. On day 3, pirates found them. Not rare in the Lomeric Drift. But fast. Kalen tried to shake them, diving into the storm belt, engines flaring hot. Solvi didn't scream. Didn't panic. She grabbed a harness, snapped herself into the co-pilot chair, and started feeding him data from the scanner in a voice that didn't waver once. If we angle starboard, you can dump the coolant trail. Fake an engine failure. He stared at her. You've done this before. Her grin was sharp. More times than I want to count. They pulled it off, barely. Once the pirates dropped off, they coasted in silence for a while. Then Kalen muttered, "Who are you?" Solvi looked out at the stars. Someone who used to follow orders until the wrong ones got people killed. He didn't press. They spent the next 3 days drifting. The engine core needed time to cool after the stunt. They ran silent, no transponder. Solvi spent most of it fixing his comms array and rewiring half the NAV panel. Kalen watched her move, precise, fast, efficient. There was elegance in how she worked. Like she belonged on a ship. Or in a fight. She caught him watching once. What? He shook his head. Nothing. But the look lingered. They kissed on the 6th night. Not soft. Not gentle. Like air returning to lungs. Like two people who'd nearly died and weren't entirely sure they wouldn't again. Her fingers twisted in his shirt. His hands buried in her hair. No words. Just breathing. Just warmth in a galaxy that hadn't given either of them much of it. Afterward, she sat cross-legged on the edge of his bunk, running diagnostics from a wrist pad she hadn't mentioned owning. He leaned on the frame, shirt half-buttoned, still catching his breath. "What happens when we reach real space?" he asked finally. Solvi didn't look up. "You drop me. You forget me. You go back to pretending you're just a junker." He frowned. "That what you want? Does it matter?" "It does to me." She went very still. Then said, almost too quietly. "I used to carry orders across battlefields. Encrypted drives, intel, names. Sometimes people. Until one day, one of those names was my sister." Kalen's chest ached. "What happened?" Solvi stared at the stars outside the viewport. "I delivered the orders anyway." Silence. Then she added, "I stopped following after that." The next day, a border patrol spotted them. Kalen debated running. Solvi didn't flinch. "You'll lose your ship. They'll interrogate you. Maybe worse." He nodded. "Worth it?" She gave him a long look. Then reached across the console, touched his hand. "No, not this time." And then, softly. "Take us into the fog. I know a way out." They escaped again. Barely. And when they kissed that night, it was different. Not rushed. Not urgent. Just real. Like two pieces of something cracked finding a place to fit. The planet had been dead for a decade. Not literally, air was still breathable, the soil still clung to its nutrients, the moons still orbited in their slow ancient dance, but everything human about it had been burned away. Fires from orbital strikes had blackened whole valleys. The old colonies were crumbled husks, choked by ash and time. The lakes were still, but nothing lived beneath them. And yet, Mira had returned. With a greenhouse module, a field tablet, and a memory of what it used to smell like here when the lavender wind brushed across the eastern ridges. The first night she slept on a cot inside the Terra-base dome. No heating yet. Just silence. She dreamed of roots, tangled and reaching. They sent her help on the third day. He arrived in a single-pilot transport, all dark alloy and silence. She was outside adjusting the soil resonance field when the ship's door hissed open. He stepped out, tall and lean, with hands that looked like they'd once held things too carefully. He didn't speak immediately. Then, simply, "You must be Mira." She nodded. "And you are?" "Jace. Terraform architect. You requested someone who knew how to rebuild from the root system up." She didn't smile. "Not yet. Let's get to work." Jace didn't ask why she'd returned to Signan 3. He didn't mention the war, or the evacuation, or the names etched into the memorial half buried at the base of the hill. He just followed her into the ash fields and listened as she spoke about acidity levels, water memory, and which seeds might survive if they sank to the soil long enough. She noticed, after the second week, that he always removed his gloves before touching the earth. As if he thought it could feel him. He built her a wind shelter. Quietly. Without asking. She'd been working late, fingers red from fertilizer splices, when the gusts picked up, sweeping over the western edge of the dome. Her shoulder ached from the cold, and she ducked inside. The next morning, a shield of repurposed panels curved around her work area, crude but steady. She looked at him, where he sat repairing an irrigation node. He met her gaze. "Just thought you deserved to work without freezing." Mira studied him. "Thank you." She told him about the orchard on day 16. "We planted it just before the attacks," she said, voice soft. "Me and someone else. Peach trees." He thought they were symbolic. Jace didn't ask who he was. He just listened. She pointed to the ridge. "We buried the seedlings up there. Never got to see them bloom." Jace was quiet a moment. "Then, we can try again." They dug the first hole together. The new seedlings were genetically modified, built to grow fast, to root in scarred ground. But Mira still handled them like they were sacred. Jace noticed how gently her fingers moved over the stalks. How she whispered something as she buried the roots. Not scientific. Something older. When he asked what it was, she shrugged, a faint smile on her lips. Just a wish. The kiss happened after the first rain. It came sudden and soft, breaking a long dry spell with scattered thunder and mist. Mira had run outside, laughing, arms outstretched. Her hair plastered to her cheeks. Jace followed, slower, until she turned to him, eyes bright. "This place," she whispered. "It's remembering." He moved without thinking. Their mouths met like the clouds had given permission. Not rushed. Not desperate. Just two people who had lived through endings. Finally allowing a beginning. Afterward, they didn't talk much. But they started doing more. He brought her seeds he thought might catch. She showed him where wild moss had returned. They took long walks in the twilight, not needing to name what was happening between them. One morning, she found a single peach blossom sprouting near the ridge. She cried, silent and steady, until Jace appeared beside her and knelt down without a word. He didn't touch her. He just stayed. Weeks passed. Roots grew. So did something else. A garden. A bond. A future neither of them had dared hope for. Hey were fugitives now. Not by action, yet by existence. When Leora chose not to return to her people, and Ren refused to let her leave alone, they crossed a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. The shuttle they took from Ebon's orbital station had no registration. No destination. Just a name scrawled on the side in chipped paint, Second Wind. They didn't look back. Leora sat beside him in the co-pilot chair, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the console. The jacket he'd first draped over her shoulders still lay folded on the seat behind them. "Where do we go?" Ren asked, voice quiet. She looked at him, her eyes a galaxy of questions and answers. Somewhere they'll have to listen. News had spread in ripples across the old neutral zones. An heir had vanished. A moon farmer had harbored her. And neither had returned. What followed was speculation. Rumor. Uprising in whispers. The empires had counted on obedience. On memory fading. But Leora had made contact with someone who never forgot. When they reached the quiet edges of Signan 3, the orchard was in bloom. Ren stared out the viewport in disbelief. The satellite scans had shown nothing. No official regrowth. No terraforming listed. But there, nestled between ridges, stood a row of trees with soft gold blossoms breathing in the wind. Leora's voice caught. Someone brought it back. They landed quietly. Cautiously. And when they stepped out, they saw her. Mira. Standing with soil-stained gloves, trimming a young vine near the garden's edge. She turned when she heard them, and her eyes widened, but not with fear. With recognition. Inside the Terra Dome, over simple tea, the three of them sat. Leora explained, not in detail, but enough. Mira listened without interrupting. When the name Vesnari came up, Mira leaned forward. "You're not the only ones who left." Leora tilted her head. "You know someone there?" "Two someones," Mira said softly. "Their story ended where yours begins." Ren listened. Not as a farmer now, but as someone becoming something else. "We want to make it count," he said. "Not just survive. Change something." Mira nodded toward the data tablet beside her. "You might want to read what we've been collecting. The rebels weren't soldiers. They were engineers, botanists, ex-couriers, disillusioned diplomats. People like Mira. Like Nail and Ira, who had quietly vanished from Vesnari weeks ago and were now smuggling treaty fragments to outworld channels. Like Kalen and Salvi, last seen sabotaging a weapons transport headed for the trade border. The Empire hadn't noticed yet. But it would. At night, Ren and Leora sat together beneath the orchard canopy. The stars above Signan 3 were softer than Ebon's. They moved slower. Watched longer. "Do you regret it?" Ren asked once, his thumb brushing hers. Leora shook her head. "What we're building, it's more real than anything I left behind." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You showed me what it felt like to be seen. To be free. That's the only truth I trust now." The call came on a clear morning. A council of frontier worlds, long isolated, long dismissed, wanted to hear their case. Ren didn't ask how Mira had arranged it. Leora didn't ask how secure the channel was. They prepared anyway. Not speeches. Not declarations. Just truth. They stood before the transmit hub 2 days later. Ren adjusted his jacket. Leora reached for his hand. "We're not just telling a story," she said. "We're opening a door. And if they close it?" Her fingers tightened around his. "Then we find another way in." The broadcast reached a dozen systems. Maybe more. They didn't speak of war. They spoke of soil that healed. Of trees that remembered. Of love found not in victory, but in defiance of separation. And somewhere, in the drifting silence of the stars, it resonated. Later that night, after the transmission, they walked beneath the orchard. A soft wind moved through the blossoms. Leora stopped beneath one of the older trees and turned to him. "This began with a knock," she whispered. "And a borrowed jacket." Ren smiled. "Funny how far small things carry." She stepped closer. "Do you think we'll make it?" He didn't lie. "I think, we already are." And he kissed her like the world they dreamed was already real. Beneath the twin moons of Signan III, surrounded by blossoms that should have never bloomed. Two people who weren't supposed to love stood together. At the beginning of everything.